what we're calling DEI is the latest iteration of a historic impulse to hold institutions accountable for equity of access to opportunities, as well as equity of processes to build an economic foothold and an economic floor.
Welcome to Profound Conversations, a dynamic broadcast platform focused on building healthy communities. In an ever-evolving world, new ideas and transformative ways of being are the lights at the end of the tunnel.
This is Dr. Rawata Sankara with Profound Conversations, and we have an opportunity to speak to a profound leader, a dynamic scholar, one who has researched deeply what it means to be Black, to be woman, to be a leader, to be a visionary, to be one who blazes paths. We're here with Dr. Carey. Dr. Carey, welcome to Profound Conversations.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
We are aware of many things about you because it shows up in the literature about how you are a public educator, have done so for 15 years. You also have a great deal of experience in the K through 12 arena, but also you served as a vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion, director of public outreach and equity, college and career readiness manager, and instructor of record for government, nonprofit, and higher education organizations. You are an educator at the higher education level. You teach at the University of Maryland. You are simply one that we have to know. People must know who you are because your voice is shaping consciousness, and you are driving a discourse around this topic of DEI. Tell us about how you came to understand DEI and why do you find it to be so important?
I think what we're calling DEI is the latest iteration of a historic impulse to hold institutions accountable for equity of access to opportunities, as well as equity of processes to build an economic foothold and an economic floor. A lot of people get Martin Luther King Jr. very much the I Have a Dream speech, but the speech is beautiful. The part that made him dangerous was the March on Washington for Justice and Jobs, right? Because a lot of what we're seeing today around the erosion of labor rights, the erosion of regulations around prejudices in the workplace, especially with the EEOC, but we're also seeing a lot of employers pushing the envelope to remove labor protections for all workers, not just workers who are in protected classes. And of course, because of the way American history is taught, a lot of folks forget that the right to sell your labor is the most important right in capitalism. So we can take it all the way back to, 1640 and the John Punch decision, where we have 3 indentured servants who are running away from their master, right? So one of them is Dutch, one of them is Irish, and one of them is African American. For the Dutch and Irish runaways, they get 3 years added to their indenture. But for the African one, his indenture not only extends to the fullness of his life, but his progeny as well. So we understand that all of the money, all of the economic power for John Punch is actually going to go to whoever, quote unquote, owns him, because he no longer has the right to sell his labor. That's distinctly different from the same people who committed the same crime, but are only forfeiting 3 years of their ability to earn and to earn money for themselves, right? A lot of the conversations we see today about DEI are, didn't earn it. And I'm like, I know you're not looking at 400 years of history and all about didn't earn it. What? You owe me money with interest. And I need you to pay up now, okay? But from what a lot of we're seeing with the conversation around DEI, it's really not a conversation that has historical framing, and it actually doesn't have the nuance that it requires to really understand what's going on. there's a lot of hubbub around like, oh, the Supreme Court outlawed affirmative action. Did they really, or did they, say you can't use race as a single category, but they didn't outlaw using zip codes? And you can tell from a zip code how much a family earns. You can tell whether or not this student was exposed to higher education. Are they first generation or continuing generation? You can tell quite a lot of information about a student and an application just from using the zip codes. And a lot of the college officers are looking now at admissions officers are looking at, okay, well, what's the average income in that zip code? How does that line up with our current student body? I did my undergrad work at Williams College, which prides itself on being a need blinds admissions college, right? A lot of what happens at Williams is you start to look at how wealth is concentrated in institutions and in families. In America, 40% of the people who become average K-12 teachers, 40% of them have at least one parent that is a teacher. So you're not choosing a professional pathway in an unknown way. You're actually choosing a pathway that's already been created for you, that already has the network built in, that already has institutional relationships, as well as job market relationships. And when we look at attorneys and we look at doctors, we start looking at more than 50 to 60%, right? So when we're thinking about the stratification that happens across higher education to K-12 and how it's related to DEI, we understand that a lot of the programs that are meant to open up women's leadership, access for tribal and women's colleges, right? Those are to correct historic and systemic problems of access. They're not there for people who are not qualified. In fact, I'm with Michelle Obama. She says, I've been in these rooms and these people aren't all that smart. It's like, you know what? I tend to tell my students the fact that you're in the same place without the same supports means you are well equipped and well qualified. So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
So thank you so much for that conversation. You took it historically to the punch discussion about the commodification of the human body. Who owns the body? And so in this context, we talk about a society deeming itself as ownership of a population for the purpose of labor. And so we know this is the same conversation that occurred with the decision to during the wartime. We talked about the issue of labor and contraband, and between the Union and the Confederate soldiers, and how soldiers actually moved to the Union space. And so they captured the enslaved Africans, and they utilized them as they said that we have your tools, not necessarily have your people. We have your tools. And so anything that you're using against us, the Union said, then it is a tool against us. And so we gather it. And so the Africans were deemed as such. Many Africans were trying to get over to the space to get free, but they still fell into the same trap. So I like how you couch the conversation, and people do liken the idea of a particular narrative of Dr. King and equity and working together. And I have a dream, but they leave out the discussion of how people are coming, what you were saying, coming to get our check. That there is a check that has been written, but it is returning to us NSF, insufficient funds. We're not receiving what is owed to us. That there have been land grant institutions that have received funds, and they received so much funding for farming, and yet we receive nothing. And then when we begin to suggest that we are owed this, then it is as if we are using or playing the race card. Powerful narrative, powerful discourse, powerful statement, powerful position. I want to know, before we really dive into that part of the conversation, is about you. How did this become something of deep and profound interest for Dr. Carey?
I think we can take it back to pre-kindergarten. I grew up in Prince George's County, and I went to a school called Cameron Run. And part of the school's program I was in was like a preschool program that had lunch, and it had field trips and all sorts of things that my parents were looking for as far as enrichment and having a full, really robust curriculum. We even had chickens that we fed, which tickles my mom to this day. She loved the program until it had a change in director. And instead of the Black man who was leading it and kind of taking care of us like a little kid village, he was unceremoniously dismissed and a white woman was brought in. And immediately the tenor of the program changed, so much so that my parents still talk about it. We were no longer able to get breakfast. We were no longer able to get lunch. We didn't have free books. A lot of the money for the grants funding the program actually ended up being sent back to the grant funders. So this was something that was pretty important to me because I love keeping chickens. And I think that started with my early exposure, right? But I also had incidents in the classroom where I was told by another kid, oh, you can't be Cinderella because you're Black. And none of the adults were made to apologize to me. Nobody ever rectified the situation. As like a little sensitive kid who liked writing poetry and stuff, that was really upsetting for me. But that was my first encounter with not just the structural racism of defunding programs for kids who are in low-income neighborhoods, but it was also my exposure to the fact that, oh, people are individually invested in this because of the power they think it gives them over other people, right? Fast forward, 20 years, and I'm doing my master's thesis on global Cinderellas and Black girls' responses to them in deindustrializing cities, right? So still looking at what does it mean to be a Black girl reader? What does it mean to author yourself as well as author your story? How do Black girls understand themselves as race and gendered beings, right? And what do they think about beauty? I think my first thesis was actually with 6th graders, and we did John Steptoe's Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters. We did the Gospel Cinderella set here in Detroit. And we did, I think, the Magic Orange Tree from Haiti. So like thinking about the motherland and the diaspora. And all of the kids really liked the Gospel Cinderella. And consistently, they would tell me in our after-school book club sessions, right? After they told me they didn't like the snacks and they wanted fresh books, not used ones, right? That they really loved the Cinderella story with the Gospel Cinderella because she got to get married and she had a happily ever after. And I was like, really? Because this is where you learn as a researcher not to analyze your data before your data is ready, right? I really learned that the girls were super excited about the romance of the Gospel Cinderella, as opposed to the family narrative of John Steptoe's work. They also really liked the artwork. We forget that Black girls as readers are also looking at art. They're responding to art, and that they are authoring themselves and seeing themselves through the lens of that art, right? So I think that was probably the long way of saying I've understood for a very long time that there are these invisible levers that some people are pushing and pulling and some people are being impacted by.
That's powerful. You said that you were 5 years old when it happened, and the degree to which you began to understand the interweaving of this narrative of white supremacy and the narrative of African inferiority, and how the children understood that because they suggested that you could not serve in a certain role. They then also the the systemic dynamic of the particular director being removed from the position. Beginning to see that when he removed, there was also a level of consciousness that he brought to the particular program. It seems to be one of African communalism, talking about the issue of breakfast and those kind of things, as opposed to the European rigidity of individualism. So, I mean, there's so many layers to that conversation that could be explored. I am just in awe of this idea of the awareness of the first time. My first experience of being called the N-word, as people would suggest, was I was in 1st grade. I was the only Black male in this space. And the similarity of the storyline is that when the person called me the name, all of the children, most of the children in the classroom said, ooh, and then when children say, ooh, I guess it's something pretty serious. The teacher wasn't in the classroom. She had stepped out for a moment. And And I was the only one in the room, it seems like, who did not know what the N word meant, because my parents did not socialize me around that particular construct, right? And so it speaks to this idea of socialization and the role and influence of cultural socialization or racial socialization on the psychological well-being of a population. And I'm liking that then to the imagery and iconography of the book, right? The Cinderella discourse. Well, I want to talk to you about this. I want to hear about the Cinderella conversation and how you use it for your dissertation, your master's thesis, as well as your dissertation. It's very, very intriguing narrative. And this iconography and imagery found in the book. And so there is identification process by which we find our children seeing themselves and then seeing what they can be and can become. It isn't interesting that the females were drawn to the narrative of the relationship in that piece, but also what captivated them was the imagery. We did some of the similar things with our children to make sure that they did not grow up conceptualize themselves as being something other than themselves. So it's powerful, and that is that my children always had books of people that look like them, right? Those African narratives, whether it was Sugbaga Musa, it was Dada Segbo Shell. My daughter reminded me that not too long ago, she's a senior in college, and she said, well, I'm doing well. And says, Daddy, nobody knew about that story. And it was about Dada Segbo and his shell and how he was able to massively amass some wealth. But he was expected to be defeated. He went to marry the king's daughter. And so she remembered the narrative, and the narrative then spoke to who she was, right? And so this is so important. This portion, explain this part about Cinderella and what does it mean to find this global Cinderella narrative for you? What is that, the Cinderella narrative?
For me, the Cinderella narrative is about a Black woman getting what she wants, right? Like to actually not be the mule of the world and suffer your whole life, but to get to live a life where you have ease, you have peace, you have comfort, you are cherished and treasured, and you are the object of somebody's affection. Super cute, right? A lot of the work that I did with the girls, especially the sixth graders the first time around, was around that idea of who is beautiful and how do we define it. And we really got to the meat of the issue when the kids were talking about Cinderellas and the fact that they didn't know that they made more Cinderellas, because in a lot of schools, especially urban schools, the prescribed curriculum is not culturally relevant at all. It doesn't present children with a possibility model that's going to be positive. It presents them with a model of assimilation. But the fact that the girls were excited to find more Cinderellas, and I just chose the 3 that they were most excited about, because I had a whole table of them. Like, I think in China it's called like the Yexin story, and there's a magic goldfish, and the Haitian story has like a magic orange tree. And so there's millions of variations of the Cinderella story. It also helps that kids know the Cinderella story because they have the plot already. They have the characters and they have an idea of what's going to happen. So there's a lot of preloaded knowledge that they're coming with. And that makes it easier to grapple with the differences in the text. And it makes it easier for them to say, oh, this is different and I haven't seen this before. And what's the effect of that? I don't know. I didn't know they didn't make Cinderellas that didn't have yellow hair. Her hair is pinky like mine. Yes, it is. And she still gets to be the main heroine of the story. So some of it is about the aesthetics of it and understanding how Black girls understand themselves as race and gender readers. But a lot of it is about understanding what is your Cinderella story in particular, was our final essay question. And the kids really liked that one. And they really like the idea of having a Cinderella story, the rags to riches dream of being, working hard at first, but then things getting easier because you've worked hard, because you have good character, right? So there's that concept of iwapele that they don't know that they're talking about, but they are, right? And you can do a lot with that, especially because I followed them for my dissertation work into novels. And one of the novels that they liked the most was Copper Sun by Sharon Draper, and also The Skin of And they did not like Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. I was like, no, again, right? They didn't like it at all. I think because it's a slow start, and with your adolescent readers, the pacing has to pull them in really quickly. They really liked Mockingjay. They liked Hunger Games because those are fast novels. But Mildred wasn't going fast enough for them. But when we got to Copper Sun, which is a story of the Ma'afa, but it starts in the African village, and our main character, her father is the chief of the village, and she's already been arranged to marry Pineapple, who is her boo. Everybody knows this is going to happen. And when you start in the village and you start to see, oh, this is a community, there's a structure, there's a way of life, right? It's a different story than, oh, y'all was snatched up and landed here and y'all didn't know anything. Like, aside from the fact that we knew indigo, we knew rice because y'all were starving until the Carolina rice was planted, right? And for a lot of the kids, the Cinderella story was a chance to rewrite some of the narratives that they've been handed. A lot of times people look at Black girls with a lens of pathology or what needs to be fixed. If you listen to them, there's nothing to fix. You just have to remember this is a whole person. And every time you look at them with a lens of pathology or, oh, this is the struggling reader, that's a whole lie. Like, a lot of the stuff that we talked about in book club was really fun. They just haven't been given the opportunity to talk about the things that are important to them because urban schools in particular have very prescribed curriculum and they don't really read a whole story from start to finish. My school in particular had to move because they'd had a fire and lost the entire building, including the library. So how do you improve literacy scores without a library? You've removed the power of choice. And both you and I know when kids get to choose what they read, they persist at it. And because they persist at it, they get better at it really quickly.
That's right.
Particularly typically developed kids. But yeah.
It's amazing what you mentioned. You mentioned the idea of the narrative and retelling the narrative, right? How do you rescript the narrative? Even if you know the outcome, you can begin to rescript it. You can give a new nuanced meaning to it because you can put yourself into the picture. And it seems like you did that with the work that you're doing right now. You have taken the narrative from your 5-year-old self and said that this is the way this is going to go down. And so you have constructed a different ending to this entire process. And so that is most impressive with what you have done. I thank you so much for sharing in this part of Profound Conversations. You have introduced terms to us that we must be aware of. The Yoruba term of Iwa Pele, which speaks to the idea of gentle character, the notion that beingness is predicated on how you actually engage with others, not simply that you exist for yourself, but your character speaks volumes. You also introduced to us the word the Ma'afa. We utilize the word Ma'afa coming from Dr. Marimba Ani and Dr. Asa Hilliard, who suggested to us, influenced us around this idea of owning the particular terminology for ourselves, saying that we cannot utilize the term the middle passage. It sounds like walking down a hallway or using the terminology of a slave trade, which it suggests that there's some kind of implies an exchange that's equal between parties. But the Ma'afa is the great suffering of African people at the hands of Arabs and Europeans. This suffering not only occurs in the context of bodies being owned by others, but Dr. Carey reminds us of this idea of the Ma'afa is an ongoing process by which Punch had to deal with the issue of his body and his labor being owned for perpetuity. And that continues to be a conversation in 2026 of the idea of what does it mean to be owned, to exchange your labor for the process of bettering your life. Dr. Carey of the Acoma Leadership Consulting. She is one, again, you must know. We thank you for being a part of this segment of Profound Conversations.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining our Profound Conversation. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to our podcast and then gift this information to a friend or family member using the share button. You can find our show on all social media platforms as well as on our website at profoundconvos.com.